This is a podcast by the Straits Times.
Hello everyone. Welcome to Speaking of Asia. I'm Ravi Velloor. In this episode, I discuss the Gurkhas, the legendary warriors from the hill tribes of Nepal. Gurkhas have been in the news lately for a variety of reasons, including reports that several thousands of them have joined the Russian army and some have died fighting in Ukraine. Nepalese soldiers are now said to be working in 22 foreign militaries, according to analysts in Kathmandu. However, the Indian Army, which was the biggest foreign recruiter of Gurkhas, reportedly does not recruit from Nepal any longer after a change in policies in New Delhi. This has led many young Gurkhas to seek places in faraway armies, and that is partly because of the high unemployment at home. To discuss the Gurkhas and their future, I have with me in the studio one of the most decorated officers of the Indian Army, Lieutenant General Shokin Chauhan. During his long career, General Chauhan has led a strike corps and led counter-terrorist operations in Kashmir and elsewhere. He retired as Director General of Assam Rifles, India's oldest and biggest paramilitary force, and now spends his time speaking and writing on military matters. The general is an acknowledged expert in Nepal. He also happens to be an old friend of mine. Welcome to Speaking of Asia, General Shokin Chauhan.
Thank you, Ravi. I look forward.
Shokin, you are a second-generation Gurkha officer, and I remember attending your commissioning ceremony back in December 1979. Now, you were commissioned into the Gurkha Rifles.
Yes, that's right.
There's a lot of mystique about the Gurkhas. Could you tell us something about these people?
I can't understand the mystique because they're wonderful soldiers. They give their life for you as I would give my life for them. I've spent 40 plus years commanding them. And as you mentioned, I was second generation, so 20 years before that. You know, the Gurkhas are soldiers par excellence, and for a variety of reasons. One is, when you go to a regiment and you're commissioned, they take you as their leader. They allow you to make your mistakes. They follow you, they guide you, they laugh with you, they laugh at you, and you start loving them because they have the ability to do anything you tell them with a smile. They're absolutely fabulous in the mountains and the jungles. They have a sense of the terrain. They're amazing scouts, amazing people who can climb any kind of mountain in any place. And I've, as you said, commanded anti-terrorist groups in Kashmir and the northeast, where the jungles, the secondary jungles, the primary jungles are so heavy. But wherever I was, and when I was a young officer, I allowed my Gurkhas to lead me. And they would tell me 5 minutes before anything was to happen, Sahab, stop. There's something ahead. They have an amazing sixth sense, Ravi. They can make out the terrain. They can make out if somebody's gone. They're excellent trackers. If you say, remember there was this movie about the American Indian trackers? They're as good as them, the boys who come from the hills. But most important of all, Ravi, is what they take you as. And let me give you a little story here. It's a story I've narrated sometimes and, while talking about the Gurkhas. I was a young officer we're talking about 1980, 81. So when I reached my regiment, this young soldier, Dhan Bahadur Rai, who belonged to a small state district in Nepal called Bhojpur, which is about, 11 hours from the roadhead. He fell ill of cancer and he was dying, and he told me, before dying, he said, Saab, can you make sure that my insurance check, which was 75,000 rupees in those days, reaches my mother? It should not be given to my brother because he'll drink it away. And with that request, I went to my commanding officer and I told him after Dhan Bahadur died, I said, look, I need to go to Nepal. And he said, okay, your next leave is coming in another couple of months, you can go. So off I went to Nepal, walking 11 hours. We reached, another boy and me, we reached the Arun River, which you're aware is a huge mountain Himalayan river, very fast flowing, at about 6:37 at night, which was in the middle of December. So we had no place to stay, Ravi. And why I'm narrating this to you is because what they really are to you, And we found a house 15 minutes away from there. And I remember going up with that young lady. She was the only one with a small baby staying there. and we requested her to put us up for the night, which she did. She said, please come in. She had only one room. There was a cowshed outside, and she said, stay here. We were carrying our sleeping bags. It was no problem. And we stayed there the night. And the next morning, I asked her in Nepali, I said, Bahini, the younger sister, why did you allow two strange men to come to your house at 8 at night? And you know what she said, Ravi, is what epitomizes the Gurkhas. She said, Daju, that's elder brother, when I heard that you were an Indian Army officer, I felt God had come home. And gods don't do wrong things. So from the beginning of my career, Ravi, I realized that to the men I command, I was their God. I was their super being. And I had to lead them. And in operations, they allow you to lead. They follow you. And I remember when I was a commanding officer, I lost a soldier. And I had been pushing my men for very long, and it was, I think, the third day of continuous operations. The soldiers were tired. We were fighting at 14,000 feet. And I called my men. I lost one soldier, then another one, and I called them in the evening, and I said, look, I'm sorry I pushed you so much. And one of them stood up and said, Saab, you are our commanding officer. You don't have to be sorry. We've joined this. We will follow you. We want you to be the best you can be. And if some of us die, it doesn't matter. So I am so emotionally attached with the Gurkhas that I can think of no other soldiers better than this. Not just for their physical capabilities, not just for their scouting abilities, but the ability to be with you and to create any bad situation into a good situation. You need a Gurkha there. He will laugh, he will sing, he will do anything. It's so fabulous to be with them. And I spent a lifetime with them, Ravi.
Mm-hmm. Amazing stories. And thank you for that, General Chauhan. Do you have any other personal anecdotes to relate?
A lot. It's 40 years. But like I said, every personal anecdote that I had when I was leading my soldiers in operations, the one thing that stood out was their willingness to take risks. Their willingness to go and do their task to the best of their ability. And when things got really bad, they wouldn't turn around and say, where are you taking us? They would say, Saab, maybe we can look at another option.
So they are confident enough to speak up
Amazing.
And give you feedback.
Yes, the youngest of them could stand up and say, Saab, I have something to say. And I would say yes. And he would come up with an amazing innovation that would say, why didn't I think of this before? And then he'd laugh with you and say, Saab, haha, you listened to me. Thank you so much. And not just the Gurkhas, their families are very disciplined. They keep their place clean. So even in peacetime, these are the soldiers who give you no problems. They don't create more issues. And you'd be surprised, Ravi, that over the many last 15, 20 years since the Indian Army has been taking part in the Cambrian Patrol competition in Britain, it is the Gurkha regiments of the Indian Army that are excelling. That shows that even in the latest battlefield, these are the boys that win the gold medal in the Cambrian Patrol.
That's amazing. You know, the average Gurkha soldier doesn't look too tall, and especially when compared with people in, let's say, the British Army or even the Indian Army, various arms of the Indian Army. Do militaries have special rules for them when it comes to recruitment?
Of course we have. The Indian Army allows a certain height, and the Gurkhas are given a 2-inch further dispensation as far as height is concerned. So, yes, we allow this dispensation in as far as their education qualification is concerned and as far as their height is concerned. So, these are the two dispensations in our recruiting norms that we allow the Gurkhas to have.
And I assume that applies to other militaries like Britain also.
Absolutely, because Britain takes about 100 soldiers a year. We used to take 1,000 soldiers a year. And these were based on the tripartite agreement that was signed between the King of Nepal, the Government of India, and the Government of Britain in 1947. So, based on that, we would take a certain amount, Britain would take a certain amount based on what we wanted, and the Nepalese government would permit us to take these soldiers.
You know, earlier this week I was speaking to Yuvraj Ghimire in Kathmandu, who's a senior analyst, and I'm sure you know him very well.
Yes,
he tells me that Nepalese soldiers have been recruited by 22 foreign armies. Is that your information as well?
I would accept Yuvraj Ghimir's view on this, but the two armies where it was legal, which we don't take the Gurkhas as being foreign nationals, is the Indian Army and the British Army. In everywhere else, probably France, Russia, France, I know that they joined the Foreign Legion, and a whole lot of other countries they may go and join illegally or legally because they might need these soldiers. But in our country, they're not foreign soldiers. They're very much a part of our diaspora. As you're aware, Ravi, we have a very large Gurkha population in India. Indian Gurkhas.
How big are they?
In terms of percentage, maybe very less because India is the most populous country in the world. But enough to fill our Gurkha regiments for the next 10 years.
Uh-huh.
And the diaspora is strong. It's well educated. It's strong. They are what to say in they are generational soldiers. So they're doing very well in the Indian Army, the Gurkha diaspora of India.
Yeah. Well, but just to come back to the question of Nepali Gurkha soldiers in foreign armies, why do they like to fight for foreign forces? Is it all money, or is it because they have nothing else to do? Why do they do that?
Well, exactly what you said. Firstly, Nepal. It has no industry. It has no large markets. There are no great employment opportunities. And these soldiers are hardy and tough. And they've been fighting in the Indian Army since 1818. That's the colonial Indian British Army. And these are fifth generation, sixth generation soldiers whose parents have done the same thing. Fathers, grandfathers, great-grandfathers. They've been in the same wars. And this is one part of them which is really good. But if Nepal had employment opportunities, if it gave them the education that they would use to develop other skills, I'm sure these boys would do other things. But because of the lack of education and employment opportunities, these boys maybe join armies.
Exactly. Earlier this year, I was reading reports quoting the Nepalese ambassador to Moscow on Nepalese soldiers in the Russian army. And I was thinking of a scenario where a Gurkha in the Russian army confronts a Gurkha in the Ukrainian army. Would they be able to fire at each other? What is your sense?
They have a very strong sense of community. And if they recognized each other, I doubt whether they'd fire at each other. They're very strong. They're a small community, Ravi. It's very small, 23, 24 lakh people, maybe.
2.4 million people.
2.4 million, maybe 2.8 million, out of which 9 million work in India. There's a common language called the Khaskura, that is Nepalese. And if they recognize each other...
You speak Khaskura?
Of course I do. I speak many dialects in Nepal, but definitely Khaskura is one issue where I speak very well. And I'm speaking this language for the last 40, 45 years. So I think I speak Nepalese better than I speak Hindi. But no, they have a strong sense of community and they'd never fire at each other.
I see. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Now, to talk about your own army, the Indian Army, which used to be the biggest overseas recruiter of Gurkha troops from Nepal, I understand that India began recruiting Gurkhas in 1947.
1824.
1824, but subsequently there was an agreement.
First Gurkhas, which we call the Nasiri Platoon, was raised in 1824.
Right.
And we have it with India. The first Gurkha Rifles
Was in India.
And that regiment has stayed back in India.
Oh, that's the regiment stayed back in India.
Yes.
But in 1947, you just spoke about this tripartite agreement between the monarch of Nepal and the British and the Indian armies. Today, you have about, 40,000 Gurkha troops in the Indian army? Or
you would be approximately right. 40,000 is fine. We have 128,000 plus pensioners in Nepal.
I see.
You have 39 to 40,000 serving soldiers. And we used to recruit 1,000 soldiers per year.
I see. Now, it's also been reported that you no longer recruit from Nepal. For the last 3 years, after new policies came in New Delhi, could you give me a sense of the thinking behind that decision?
Okay, Ravi, firstly, the new policy was the Agnipath system of recruiting soldiers.
Okay.
The Agnipath scheme, as I said. It doesn't say that Gurkhas should not be included. It doesn't talk of that. It is the government of Nepal who said that if they are to join as per this scheme, then we will not allow our soldiers to join the Indian army. And therefore, you are not permitted to carry out recruitment rallies in Nepal.
But if they come to you
If
on
they
their
come
own,
to me, that's not a problem. But we haven't stopped them. They have stopped themselves because they felt that the government of India did not consult them before we launched the Agnipath scheme. Okay, that they felt that we had probably violated the agreement of the tripartite agreement of 1947, where we've said that we will treat them as our own. So this was the issue. But the Agnipath scheme is across the board in the sense that all recruitment in India over the last 3 years is through the Agnipath scheme. So the Gurkhas stopped joining because it did not give them pension.
so the Agnipath scheme is short-term recruitment, essentially.
It is recruitment for 4 years, of which the first 6 months is spent in training, and the balance 3.5 years is spent in the regiment or the army. And of this, 75% of these boys are allowed to leave, and 25% are retained. And those 25% will then go on to take their pensions.
So the thinking behind this pattern is to save on pensions and on personnel. Am I correct in thinking that? Because
Well,
I understand that the Indian military spends about 60% on pay and pensions.
So that's one of the narratives, Ravi. The saving of pensions is probably one of the narratives. I think also the government wanted to increase the employment. So they said if there's a faster movement of people, then we might be able to give more employment to our people. That also seems to be one of the issues behind the reason why we brought in the Agnipath scheme. So pension, it would start affecting us only by 2040, 45. Nothing would happen before that because that is the time they would finish these 20 years and be eligible for pension. So there's going to be no effect till then. The faster employment for more people is probably the short-term gain here. But again, I must stress that it is the government of Nepal which has stopped the recruitment. It is not the government of India. And we are continuously in touch. The President Gurkha Brigade goes to Nepal. He has spoken to the highest levels there. Our ambassador has been speaking to them. And we have made it clear that we welcome the Nepalese into the Indian army. But they, like the rest of the soldiers, must follow the same norm. That is the Agnipath scheme.
I get that. Could it be that one day the Indian army will not have a Gurkha regiment?
Ravi, as I was explaining to you, our diaspora has enough Gurkhas to last us.
When you say your diaspora, you're talking about Nepalese, ethnic Nepalese living within the Indian borders?
Who are Indian origin Gurkhas.
Okay.
That diaspora has enough Gurkhas and enough replacement rate. So that's not a problem. People are not a problem in the Indian army. We have hill tribes, we have the Gurkhas in Dehradun, we have the Gurkhas in Himachal, we have the Gurkhas in Darjeeling, we have the Gurkhas in Siliguri, we have them in Sikkim. So there's not a problem about Gurkhas and there's not a problem with the regiment. That's not in danger.
Mm-hmm.
The issue is the Nepalese origin Gurkhas. I am an advocate personally that it's very important for us to have Nepalese origin Gurkhas with us. They are the best of the people in Nepal, and I have found their abilities superlative.
Fascinating. Nepal has been led by Maoists and Marxist-Leninists in recent years, even after the government change, of Marxist-Leninists are still in power. Does that affect the attitudes to foreign armies taking Nepalese soldiers?
You know, Ravi, this change that was happening in Nepal, one of the things you didn't mention about me was that I was India's defense advisor or attaché in the Indian embassy in Kathmandu. I think you came and met me there.
I did.
When I was India's defense attaché, at the same time, Prachanda had launched his revolution, as they call it, the second Jan Andolan. And I was there when the changeover took place.
This was in 2008, I would say?
2006, the king gave up power.
Right.
2007, 8, 9. That's the time when the transition took place.
And the first communist government.
Under Prachanda. But communism didn't come to Nepal in 2007. The first Nepalese Communist Party, which was a shadow of the Indian Communist Party, came up in 1950. Since 1950 to 2007, there had been 19 splits in the Communist Party. Each split more radical than the other. So Prachanda was just a manifestation of the splits that took place in the Communist Party. The Nepalese Marxist, Communist, Leninist parties are nowhere near the Chinese concept of communism.
You mean the most social democratic parties then?
It's not even an ideology.
I see.
And I do remember in 2005-06, when they were fighting the king, the Chinese would refer to them as the anti-nationalist, anti-national forces, and not as communist soldiers. Prachanda was leading something called the People's Liberation Army, which he termed similar to the Chinese PLA. But at no point it was nothing like that.
Prachanda's actual name is Pushpa Kumar Dahal?
Dahal, yes. He belongs to the Bharatpur district, that means center Nepal, center hills. And he's a Brahmin by caste.
Not a Gurkha.
Not a Gurkha. Not a Tamang, by Gurkha, let me that does not belong to the tribes that are recruited by us. 9th Gurkha recruits people from that side, but Pushpa Kumar Dahal doesn't belong to that part. So when that happened, like I said, the Chinese have never accepted them. So they're not the Chinese form of this ideology. In Nepal, ideology, it's just politics. And it's had, as you know, 10 governments in the last 6 years. It'll continue when this course. Stability seems very far away at the moment.
Right.
And another issue about the politics in Nepal is that it's supported by the Nepal Congress Party. Prachanda is the Prime Minister, where he's supported by the Nepal Congress Party. So it's just a coalition of convenience.
Interesting way to put it. Nepal also is a contributor to international peacekeeping operations. Do you think that will continue, or are they rethinking that as well?
Not at all. We're not, as far as the Indian Army is concerned.
I'm talking about the Nepalese.
There's no question. There's no question. Nepal contributes to the United Nations. They are a very respected member of the United Nations forces, and that continue. I see no reason why.
The Marxist-Leninists will not impede that?
No, not at all. Those narratives by Prachanda during 2006 were just political in nature. They meant nothing. There is no question, Ravi, of these soldiers not joining up and fighting as soldiers.
Staying on the subject of Nepalese and foreign militaries, many East Asian countries, and I'm talking now of China, Japan, South Korea, have an aging problem. And that's making military recruitment a challenge for these armies and for their militaries. Are you aware of any militaries in East Asia that might have looked at recruiting Gurkhas to make up the shortfalls?
Ravi, I am not aware of that. I have no knowledge of that. The army is a strange national instrument, Ravi. You can't outsource it to somebody else.
But you have.
Nepalese are not foreign to us. I said that in the beginning. Nepalese are not foreign to us. To us, they are part of us. They're part of our lives. They're emotionally a part of us. And she is a different country, but we are one people. Our customs, our culture, everything's the same, Ravi. When you go to Nepal, you don't find anything different. So I always say this. Nepalese and Indians are one people. We may be two different sovereign nations, but definitely one people. Our heart beats together.
Thank you for that. General, you're known as Scholar General, and I have a broader question for you, and it is this. The way modern warfare is evolving, and with the increasing use of robotic weapons, do infantry people, foot soldiers such as the Gurkhas, have relevance in modern warfare?
Ravi, you only have to look at the Russian-Ukraine campaign to know how important foot soldiers are. Why is Russia taking Nepalese or people from different places because they need soldiers on the ground. They need boots on the ground. Why is Ukraine doing the same thing? That despite all the sensors, all the technologies, eventually victory is judged by feet. You need to be there to hold ground. But that's not the issue. The issue is that these sensors can only take you to a particular point. The sensor is used to give you a transparent view of the battlefield. It can't win the battle for you. The missiles are meant to cause destruction on the soldiers there, but they can't win the battle for you. Eventually, the battle is won by the soldiers who go across and win it. Which is why Russia is moving towards the Dnieper River, which is why Ukraine launched the counteroffensive, boots on ground. Either way, you go back to Israel, Gaza, the same issue. The Israeli armies inside Gaza, they need soldiers on the ground. You need people to go and find. You can have the best of sensors, you still can't get your hostages. So every battle, regardless of whichever future you're in, you will need people to fight it. And you can't outsource this.
That was a fascinating conversation. Lieutenant General Shokin Chauhan, thank you for coming and speaking of Asia.
Thank you, Ravi. Thank you for calling me. I truly enjoyed this conversation with you.
And that's a wrap for Speaking of Asia. I'm Ravi Velloor. Don't forget to share this podcast with your friends and family. If you'd like to read my articles, we have links in our podcast show notes below. This podcast was produced and edited by Faiza Sani.
Send your feedback to podcast@sph.com.sg. Find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or within our Straits Times app. Thanks for listening.